Mirëdita. Faleminderit që jeni këtu sot në bashkëbisedimi midis Lala Meredith-Vula dhe Monika Szewczyk lidhur me ekspozitën Urtësi sot e mot, e cila u hap mbrëmë në Muzeun Kombëtar të Fotografisë Marubi. Mbrëmë pat mundësi të njiheni me dy ciklet e punëve që prezantohen në këtë ekspozitë, Kujtesë gjaku dhe mullarët. Sot artistja Lala Meredith-Vula dhe kuratorja Monika Szewczyk do të na flasin më shumë në lidhje me eksperiencën e tyre të bashkëpunimit edhe në kuadrin të ekspozitës ndërkombëtare documenta, ku punët e artistëve shfaqen në qytetin e Kasit dhe në qytetin e Atinës. Përpara se t'ja jap fjalën dy bashkëbiseduesve, një profil të shkurtër si të artistës, ashtu edhe të kuratores. Lala Meredith-Vula ka studiuar art dhe bukra në Goldsmith College në Britaninë e Madhe. Ekspozita e saj e parë u organizuar në Kollegj e Ekspozitës tashmë me famë ndërkombëtare Freeze të artistit të mirënjohur britanik Damien Hirst në vitin 1998. Ajo ka përfaqësuar Shqipërinë në Bienalen e Societeit të Venecias në vitin 1999, ndërkohë që ka ekspozuar edhe në galeri të njohura në Europë por edhe më tej. Vjen nga një eksperiencë edhe në Galerinë e Arteve të Kosovës, ku është paraqitur në cikli Kujtesë gjaku, ndërsa në vitin 2017 punët e saj u përzgjedhën për ekspozitën documenta. Kuratorja Monika Szewczyk ka qenë pjesë e stafit kuratorial të documenta 14. Më përpara ka punuar si kuratore pranë programit të arteve vizuale në Reva dhe David Logan Center for Art. Ka qenë përgjegjëse për publikimet e Vite Center for Contemporary Art në Rotterdam, asistente kuratore në Vancouver Art Gallery. Njëkohësisht ka qenë edhe lektore pranë Emily Carr University në Vancouver, Peter Varts Institute në Rotterdam, Bergen National Academy. Shkrimet e saj janë publikuar në katalog dhe revista ndërkombëtare si After All, Art Forum, Mus, Iflux e të tjera. Ne jemi shumë të lumtur që e kemi këtu sot dhe jemi shumë kurioz edhe të njohim diçka më shumë edhe rreth njohjes së tyre, rreth bashkëpunimeve që kanë pasur, eksperiencave të mëparshme dhe gjithashtu edhe ekspozitës Urtësi sot e mot këtu në Muzeun Marubi. Faleminderit edhe një herë që jeni me ne dhe ju kaloj fjalën ju.
Okay. Welcome everybody. I'm going to start just a very short presentation just to show you a little bit more background photographs, and then we'll open it up to our conversation and hope that you could have any questions. I'm going to start by explaining my background by showing you photographs, because we're in Marubi Museum, so I think that's the sort of best way of explaining who I am. So the first slide is actually this is my father. He's the second smallest child there. This is done in Jakarta in 1941. He's with his father, Riza Vula, and that's it, Riza. And the oldest boy is Ibrahim. Then it's Asim, and then Suleiman, who's the grandfather of Leslie Vula, by the way. So Suleiman is Agron and Jerry's father. Agron's father. He's the grandfather of Leslie Vula. Then it's Ganimeta, and then my dad's Recep, and Rabia is the baby there. So this is half of me has come from this background, and my father says that he was so poor, that he had to borrow some shoes for this particular picture, and he remembers going out and finding he borrowed Dugajin Reja's shoes. So for this picture, and very sadly, my grandfather died within months of this photograph. So my father didn't have a father shortly after this picture, and his mother was called Zeliha. She's not here. There are pictures of her, and they used to call her Lala. because Lala is actually a man's name. It's the most honourable uncle, and they called her honourable uncle or man because she brought up the rest of his family, and so I was given her nickname Lala when I was born, but she died in 1963, it's before I was born. So the next slide. This is my mother in the same year, so 1941. Now you've got the other half of me. Her mother was Jewish, German Jewish. Her family emigrated to England from Germany, and they spoke German in 1890. They emigrated to England, and they became Christians because they were Jewish. And then my grandmother was born in 1920s, 1913, I can't remember. But this is 1941, and my mum's a baby there, so you've got the other half of me. Next, and then this is Sarajevo, and this is me, my father and my mother in 1966 on the street Jovana Popovic in Sarajevo. So through these three photographs, you've got England, Jakova and Sarajevo. You've got some kind of idea of my background. So now there's just a whole selection of images.
Should I keep going?
Yes,
Yeah.
Can you just put it on? So this is the first ever picture of the blood feud reconciliations that I took in Skanderai. I studied in England and then I came back to Kosovo to carry on my study, and I was interested in haystacks that you see upstairs. But one of my friends from this village said, please come, my father's doing this reconciliation thing. I didn't really understand, but she promised that they would take me to see some haystacks before we went to this meeting. So I just agreed, and then I came upon this, they were all gathered, and Adam Yashari is there, and Adam Yashari's father is there. I've caught them. They were just this. They're from this Drenica. Is that right? And you can keep rolling. So here, this is all. That is Adam Yashari's father. What's his name? Quick, Adam Yashari's father. Oh, thanks for helping me out. You're on your own. And here you at the front row, you've got sometimes the victims or the murderers were put on the front row so they'd be nearer to reconcile. And the village would have worked, the action of the Blood Feud group would have worked to bring the blood feuds together. And here they decided to release the bird of peace. And this is the moment as they release it. And they just release as a sort of symbolic. And then there'd be professors and very respected people that would come. This is Anton Szewczyk Plana. This is the brother of my friends, the uncle of my friend from the village who was greeting Anton Szewczyk. Then the two feuding blood feuds would come forward, and and the victim's family would renounce this continuing revenge tradition. Keep going. I got to know people. I love the traditions, the way people. This is the man's room, there was a real tradition of talk. You'd have this room ready for guests. It would be like the guest room, and you'd expect maybe a delegation might arrive from another village, or you could discuss things in the man's room. Then I followed a particular blood feud, Isak from Shkoz in Malyshev, and he had 21 children, and here he's proud with his 2 wives, and he had 21 children then, but later on he had 24 children. Incredible person, and I've caught this on the BBC. I did a film with the BBC, and we followed his journey and the journey of the delegation as they tried to get him to reconcile, because he really didn't want to reconcile. He brings it home how difficult it is to forgive somebody who's murdered one of his son. He lost his oldest son. So it was a real, it's a very, very big thing to be able to forgive. Next one. And this is him in the fields. You know, I loved this way of life. I loved horses as a child. I used to draw horses, and I like just living there. This is his grandmother. This is his other son. So just a little bit of the background, and then before all these photographs, I was absolutely fixed on the haystacks, and these were just the people that I tried to capture. They just had such a lot of, emotion.
I'm just skipping ahead a little bit.
Yes, do keep. This is in Veretă-Lucas in near Dăcean, and it's after the blood feuds. People were dancing. People have identified, since I showed in Pristina, they've identified this musician was a local musician.
We have a picture in the exhibition from Veretă-Lucas, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Which one is it?
It's the one in the corridor climbing the trees.
Yes,
so
exactly.
They all climb trees. You can see the trees in the background. This is all Veretă-Lucas. This is a woman who's dressed as a man for 60 years. She's a virgin woman. I think you've heard of the phenomenon. And I wandered around Rugova photographing, and I stayed with her, staying with people, because they called me like Edith Durham, because apparently Edith Durham did the same thing. She sort of wandered around and stayed with people unannounced.
And for those people who maybe have not seen it, there is a great photograph of Edith Durham upstairs that Marubi took.
Yes, yeah, so it's been very moving to see that. So she knew all her sheep, and she called me for that photograph. So then I was interested in the making of the haystacks, and they'd call all the families together and help do each haystack. So each farmer would help other farmers do, when they had to make hay. This man was just wandering through Rugova, and this is a wedding in. There we go, so this is Rugova, and my beautiful haystack. Lots of these pictures I've only uncovered, recently, a few months ago. So photographers, and Marubi's the same. You go around taking lots of pictures, and you don't necessarily develop them at that moment. They just stay in negative form, because in my case, I never had time, so I was always going on to the next project. So I've been through this process, looking back, at this archive and finding messages. It's like seeing a letter from your former self. You see what you thought then and what you were up to,
Oops, sorry.
Yes, no, just keep. I think we can open it to.
We'll just maybe finish the slideshow. This is an interesting group of people. Maybe you can say a little bit about.
Yes, all these people except for a lady who lost. The lady, I've got her name written down, and she lost her son in the demonstrations of 1981, and these young people were in prison in 1981, and they were in prison with some people who were in prison for blood feuds, because when you're in prison you start a conversation, and they decided that when they left prison they would reconcile that the amount of people that died in the 1981 falls. They would reconcile that many bloods as a kind of symbol to these lost lives, and they included this mother who lost her son in that 1981, and a radio station did a program about them and reconciling these certain bloods, and suddenly lots of people came forward saying we'd like to reconcile, and it snowballed from this initial action in February 1990. Has in Jonai, all different ages of women, Jonai, and that's the picture in Jonai. These are Has ladies, Oh, they have these special, this is behind the scene where they live. You can see the haystacks in the background. This is a diep, this is a cot with a baby in it. And the next picture, she came in and said, I'd like you to photograph my baby. So it woke it up, and there it is, it's just kind of coming round, and she's tilted the cot so that we can see the baby swaddled in it. And that's how they would go round to town, you know. I followed them, you know, and that's where they lived. You can see them, that's a close-up. They were just by their corner in Jonai. And here's nearby people coming down the mountain after a blood feud, reconciliation. And this is Marashev, people going to the blood feud. You can see just how many people there were. And that's looking back, the same moment in front of her. And this is a fantastic mixture. You see Hodges, Catholic priests, and I love this man here because he's looking at me, because I must have looked to right side, you know, clambering over people with my frizzy hair, and I was 20, you know, so he's kind of giving me a kind of respectful nod, and I only see it now. I didn't see it then. I was just in a world of my own, you know. This is in Drenitz, and this is Vraniev. This is this picture here. So you can see just on the outskirts of Pristina, just coming to this gathering, and the kids, they can't see, so they found their own way of getting higher up. Whereas lots of people went in that house, as you see from the photograph on the side there, and they were in every little space. There was a human being, just not on the roof this time. And there you can see a different shot of this, where you don't see this Urtsi Sotimont. And this is you can buy it, this is in Jakova, a very old, in 1989, this picture. So this is all burnt now, you know, from the war. And this is what it originally looked like, these shops selling tack, horses tack. And some of the shops are still there, but they're just rebuilt in a modern style. Look at the brickwork, that's completely original brickwork. And this was you could buy your coffee grinder in Jakova. And, you know, in the shops, I've got a lot of shop fronts. That's another exhibition.
We'll just maybe cycle through these
yes.
a little bit.
I'd often taking people's haystacks, I'd go into their homestead and I'd come upon this view and take this picture. But not do anything with it. I just thought, wow, that's amazing, and take it. Yeah.
I think that's maybe one thing to underline. I hope everybody can hear me without the microphone, it's fine. But, it's okay. I think that the haystacks have an almost animate quality. They look like they are personalities. And it's also why we somehow thought it a good idea to put them inside the upstairs galleries, which, you know, also hold the three Marubi generations of, you know, production of photography. But they have this kind of sense of being more than inanimate objects, somehow living, breathing. And I think that maybe that comes from a sense of how you connect to people and places and everything that you photograph. I think there's something kind of remarkable, which is very different in a way from documentary photography. We see a lot of cameras in these photographs, so it's clear that journalists were present after a certain point, that these became really important historic moments to photograph and to put in newspapers. But I think that journalists tend to zero in on very readable actions. And Elsen Shkoli was mentioning last night, there's something quite remarkable in the way that there isn't a kind of focus on one person in these photographs, that power is distributed and energy is distributed, and you get a different sense of who participates in society and maybe who participates in ecology, so that the haystacks become a part of a kind of greater society. They're all society pictures, you could say, in a certain way.
This is in Jakova. just walking down the street opposite my uncle's house, saw these ladies, you know, just in the street. This is a street, getting thread, spinning thread. And the next one,
I think there is a hidden archive of textile production inside of, you
of
know, somehow
many,
off to
yes.
the side of what you've been doing, and it's kind of telling of your work. I think you go to Kosovo in the end of the 80s to photograph haystacks, very purposefully wanting to make a series.
Yes.
That has a connection to Millet and Courbet and all these 19th century painters who also have a very political side, but they're trained on haystacks as the development of a kind of new language of painting. This is maybe a new language of photography.
Yes.
But then things happen on the side, and of course someone taps you on the shoulder,
Yes.
and they tell you of the blood feud reconciliations. And I think also each photograph has this kind of more and more and more that can be seen. You mentioned, when I looked at this phrase, urtesi sot emot,
Yes.
you hadn't seen it in that photograph. You were focused on other aspects of this
Yes.
situation, because of course you're connecting to the people there, and I think somehow it's a good idea to keep looking inside the photographs and be a kind of detective within each image.
It is.
They keep yielding new information.
This is in Voskopoje, actually. So this is in Albania. In 1992, I went to Voskopoje. And, you know, you can just see this. You just walk into somebody's garden and you see this. And you, yes,
Oops, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. So carry on. That's wrong.
This looks like there's like
This is
school desks being brought out to.
yes, because this is a school behind. So they decided each village would decide to do their reconciliation in various places, and a village school would be perfect. So they just brought the school desks out and did the reconciliation there.
Maybe one interesting thing to point out, just as a broader context, is that when we showed the blood feud reconciliation photographs in Documenta 14, which took place in Athens and Kassel, we decided to kind of split the two series. The Athens was the place for the blood memory work, which the artistic director of Documenta, Adam Szymczyk, and one of the curators, Pierre Balblanc, saw in an exhibition that Erzen curated in Kosovo. And then in Kassel, we decided to show the Haystack series, which has very interesting relationships to the history of photography in Germany, particularly the Bechers.
Yes.
But the important thing maybe to point out is that we were really thinking in Documenta 14 about political organization at this moment and how do we gather people. So the public program of Documenta 14 was called the Parliament of Bodies. It was a term that our curator of public programs, Paul Preciado, came up with to emphasize that actually parliamentary politics at the moment is quite regimented and doesn't really physically involve a lot of the citizens, whereas in these particular images you really see the importance of the presence of physical witnesses and a kind of completely different organization of space. When you think of a contemporary parliament, you already have the seating arrangement where you never sit with the other person's party. You know, I'm thinking of the American Congress at the moment, but you have a place for the Democrats and a place for the Republicans. They are divided architecturally from the beginning so that they're not necessarily going to be encouraged to vote similarly.
Same in Britain as well.
Same in Britain,
yes.
Right? But what's amazing about these very spontaneous gatherings of people, and we saw this in the previous documents where you have Catholic priests and,
and
what look like imam or Muslim leaders sitting side by side. You don't have this kind of physical division of people who are essentially on different sides
Yes.
of some kind of social tension. So it actually allows for a different
Yes,
way
yeah,
to
that's a good,
for energy to flow. And I think that the
Yes.
way you moved around the space as well is very interesting. I mean, you can tell that when people look at you from the images, they don't perceive an outsider. I don't know why I say that, but it's very clear to me that...
I've got this mountain Albanian hair, the Mirdita, they keep telling me. So, they can just see that I'm Albanian. I know the guy looking at me, he could just see that I'm Albanian. I knew Albanian then. But another thing is that it's people were so kind to me because they sympathised with me. But another thing was that everybody was so isolated and desperate. That's why people would receive me in an extra, not just because they received guests, but because they felt incredibly isolated and that the world didn't know what was going on in Kosovo, because the Yugoslav, system would just say it, to the whole of Yugoslavia that the Albanians of Kosovo were irredentist, separatists, and so nobody could communicate. And so when they saw me with a camera, they would just, literally roll out a red carpet and be so happy that I was there, in fact, just present, just seeing the story. And I would wander around, in fact, Yugoslavia, and people say, don't go to Kosovo, everybody's wild in Kosovo. I say, have you ever been to somebody in Sarajevo? And they would go, no. I say, well, why don't you go and then tell me? Not, even educated people, because of this propaganda. That was another way I felt so at ease, because everybody really, today, you go to a camera and they say, don't photograph me, but then they were just, I was a sign of hope for them.
You also ride horses. We don't have you riding horses.
I know, I've got it on my hard drive. I was absolutely obsessed with horses, and I would always ask the villager to go and saddle up their horse and have a little ride while I was taking a picture of the haystacks. And after I took the haystacks, I would then ride their ponies, and they would photograph me. And it would often be out of focus because they didn't know how my camera worked. So I've got a lot of out of focus pictures of me riding.
Yeah, this one's somehow emblematic. I think you showed it in the Kosovo exhibition. It then traveled to the building that was the space for the Parliament of Bodies, and now it's in the media space.
And I wanted to bring a letter, but that was sent by this person here. He didn't go to the show in Pristina, but one of his friends went to the show at the National Gallery in Pristina and photographed him and a few others from my photograph and sent it to him in Germany. Then he contacted me on Facebook and he said that this day was a very, very important day, and that the man next to him in another view that was shown in Pristina, and he ringed it. He forgave 2 bloods of his 2 brothers that were killed in the 60s, and it was a murder that was most horrific around Ferizai, and this was a very big day for this person who was going to forgive eventually these 2 murders and meet the murderer and hug on this stage. And then that person that forgave the 2 bloods was massacred in 1998 in the Kosovo War, the person that forgave the 2 bloods. So, and he was just letting me know if I was interested, and then he asked for copies of the picture. Wow. So I know, so it was an incredible, touching letter, and it also just said, even if he didn't have copies, it meant such a lot to him to see that they were still being shown, and so it really brought home how important this archive is.
Mm-hmm. And it somehow also, I think, changes with time, its significance. I mean, we included one of the photographs by Marubi of a flag-raising ceremony here at the Shkodër Castle, which was in a previous exhibition, actually. The one I saw when I came here in August. because the scene was so remarkably similar in terms of the way people gathered to a lot of Lala's images. So it was this, of course, dialogue with the Marubi archive, but also this kind of sense of historical continuity and a way of progressing politically somehow in this region, or also keeping certain ways of assembling.
Yes.
And since we have amazing people assembled here, I thought maybe we could start to open it up to the floor and see how everyone, now that you've had a chance to see the exhibition, both downstairs with the blood memory work and upstairs with the haystacks that are in an even closer maybe dialogue with the Marubi archive, how they resonate for you. And I ask this out of a really personal interest, but we are also taping this exchange because we are hoping to contribute an interview to Moose magazine, which is an Italian publication, and I think it would be very interesting to also have the input of not just me, who's been talking to Lala a lot, but also, you know, yourselves who are coming from different parts of Albania and Kosovo, and I'm sure seeing these images with eyes that I don't possess. So it's really actually interesting for both of us to hear some comments from you.
I have a question, but it's not related to the work, it's actually related to the event. Why, Lala, why were these always big events? I mean, because like forgiving a blood feud is a very personal thing, and I would imagine that, okay, there is the people involved and the Antonceta and the group that was working on it, but why did the other people, I mean, because it's a lot of people in these photographs.
Well, it's actually, even in the canon of Lektu Gajin, is that when you forgive a blood, you need to call everybody from the valley to hear you say, I, Lala Meredith-Vula, forgive that blood. And everybody's heard you. This is a mountain culture that's pre-written. So nowadays you get a lawyer or something. Now you just gather the whole valley and say, and this was a very symbolic thing, but it snowballed because you know, everybody got to hear about it.
But I think also from that moment of Kosovo, and when you go back, I mean, I was very young at that time, but when you go back now to think, and when I recognize, and I found out about all these series from Lala, then you think this happened 90s, and it was just 2 years before the war breakdown in Croatia, and was supposed to break down in Kosovo, actually. So when you think back, you know, going back to the photo where you have Atancheko and other students who were in prison, and then they start this initiative, then you think, and involving Antonceta as a figure, because all the students did this. The Antonceta was this credible person to work with the people in the village and to kind of have respect. You think how strategic and how smart that was for that time, because having in mind that if war would break at that time in Kosovo, most of the population was in blood feud. So first they would have to kill each other to be able, who remains to fight. So what they started first reconciliation of the families, that almost no blood feud is existing in that level anymore in Kosovo. So it means that now when you think back, it's an amazing event that they happened. But for me always it was amazing, and still it is, I don't know how they did it, but it's amazing to see how they collected all these people with no telephones in the villages, no mobiles, no emails, no social media, but they were all there. And this is amazing. So it means that it was a lot of organizing of young people behind, which you actually don't see them in the front here. I mean, you see mostly the Antonceta as a figure. So also how they played, whom they put as a front figure, and how it's amazing. It's pretty amazing.
Also, this image here is, you said, the last open blood
Yes.
feud reconciliation, because they actually came under a lot of pressure.
They did. They were
Yeah.
banned. They then, it was like a joke because to make it legal, they said you couldn't have a cluster of more than 5 people or something. You know, there was always these ridiculous laws.
Yeah, in one point in Kosovo it was that, Yugoslav or Serbian law at that time, it was not allowed to be more than 3 people to walk together on the street. 2 to 3 maximum, no more.
Which is ridiculous, you know, but I think you have this
because
also...
Because they didn't want people gathering.
Yeah.
So it was another war in 90s, but it was 10 years of real repression.
Yeah.
It was really no education, no working place, and all the Albanians lived in parallel system. So everybody from doctors, at one point they became persons who would sell in market socks and cigarettes.
Yes.
Yeah. Until they became private practice doctors.
Yes.
So it was really how Kosovo functioned for these 10 years.
Yes.
89, 98. It was like huge, very well organized NGO.
Yeah.
It's really like diaspora has organized to collect the 3% of the earnings to send to the state, to sponsor and to initiate the education, the informal or parallel education.
Yes.
I was one of the first of a generation. 7 elementary school when everything was scattered, where we already started to go Albanians in the morning in the school and Albanians in the evening and Serbs in the morning, that we don't meet.
Wow.
Yeah, and then after the elementary school, no more attending the institutional building of the school. But then diaspora left all these big houses that they still own.
And that's one of the houses that
they left like empty houses, they gave it to
the school.
Prepare,
that became a school.
This 3% became the school. And this is where I got the high school and faculty education in this kind of school.
I've got a picture of this. Keep going, there's a picture of this alternative school.
So I think that everything functions as...
Was it the one we saw before with the desks?
Here.
Yeah,
this is a school.
This is the way.
Yes.
This is the way.
This is a university, actually. They
so
just
in
did
the
it in
smaller
somebody's
cities
house.
it was even more difficult, because since it was smaller, it was illegal kind of to do this.
Yes.
Then they would, everybody of us, which I think today is totally crazy, everybody of us would invite the class every day in different houses.
Wow.
But they don't catch one house. So we would host the class in our houses. So we get to go to each of houses of everybody, and also to see the social and economical differences in the families, which normally is a really intimate thing, that you enter to the house of the pupils in the class. You don't see them in the class who is rich and who is not. But this is the moment also on unveiling in personal level, each of us.
Wow.
And I think it was a very difficult time, but pretty amazing how we managed to kind of go on. And this is why I always surprised today how we can't do things and how we complain.
Yes.
With things to move on.
We've got another question here.
So I have a question related to the other series, the haystacks. You were saying that you were at the time obsessed with haystacks. And why was that? Was it because you had some cultural reference?
Yes.
Or you just saw the objects and you liked them and you got obsessed with them?
I loved Claude Monet, I liked the Impressionists, and I liked Millet, and I loved the countryside. In Britain, we had everything done by machines, and it was very mechanical. So the first time I saw a haystack, when I was 16, going back and reconnected to my family, I just thought it looked like old-fashioned Britain 100 years ago, from photography from Britain. And then, as studying art, I'd seen haystacks in these paintings, and my idea originally was to capture a photograph that looked 100 years old, but it was actually a modern photograph. So it was through studying painting.
I think there's also something really interesting in this kind of continuity between your father's, you were telling me, favorite book on architecture. He was an architect, but his favorite book is Architecture Without Architects.
Yes.
And then these are kind of artworks without artists, in some sense. I mean, they have such an incredible sculptural strength. I'm trying to find a few more. But we just have to go upstairs afterwards because there's quite a few examples, and their sculptural kind of genius is really striking. I think that's why when we found this phrase that Thea translated for me, urtesi sot emot, of course it's in the haystack, I mean it's in the blood feud reconciliation photographs, it's in the blood memory work, but I was looking for words that would describe the combination of both series. How could you get an exhibition of both of them to talk to each other? And when you apply those words to these forms, it feels very good actually, because they've been made over and over and over again, and there's a kind of practical wisdom that I mean, when you say, you know, what have we lost that we can't get organized? And I think there's really something to be done in looking at these kinds of wisdoms that are not being taught so actively anymore. It's a need to understand these kind of natural, I don't know.
This is where I think I go back to Lala, that all this archive is so important for Kosovo history. You know, that it documents something which we don't practice or don't use it today.
Yeah.
You know, it's something which is really, you know, everything we see. Also her approach when I looked at this presentation of photographs of women's weaving, you know, her approach is same approach as these women do.
Yeah.
Normally. Because I think that Kosovo and Albania has really strong personalities and characters of women, and always the most important part of the families. That they did all the job, and hardworking women, and really strong personalities, despite doing all the work that they did in the villages, which is really hard work that they do. The weaving was a kind of break for them. And this is how Lala also approached them, by also not knowing this, that she did hairstyles, but then as a break, she did weaving photos.
Yeah.
The women's, it was a both ways break, because for them it's not a work that, it's a break. So it's a lot, I think it's a lot of anthropological element in Lala, how she sees it, and how she did all this. In many cases, I mean, she had a point of hairstyles, but then the others were the documentation, which I think is very, very important for our history, and this is on the 90s.
Yes.
This is not even
yeah.
This is not long ago. I mean, I'm still alive, I'm not dead like Marubi.
Although it looked really old because villages were really remote and poor and country was very isolated, but this is really recent.
Yes.
What's interesting too about the haystacks is that they have this kind of, I mean, the Serbian farmers, the Bosnian farmers, the Kosovar farmers, the Albanian farmers, they're all making the same kinds of haystacks. They're kind of pre-national. Somehow unifying, somehow older. I don't know, they don't carry passports, we were laughing.
I said to Monika, can we call them Albanian farmers haystacks? Because I wanted to put Albania into the title. And I have titled it before Albanian farmers haystacks, because I didn't know, I wanted to use Albanian, and I couldn't put Kosovo because it could be Serbian in more political time. And Monika just said, but the haystacks aren't carrying passports. So it's out with the Albanian, so it's just haystacks.
It was, I mean, I think in the context of documenta, that was a really interesting kind of aspect of these images for two reasons. One was this kind of really transnationalism, and the other one was there is this proximity between Albanian culture, and I would, kind of put Kosovo and Albania in this because it's a language that's shared, and Greek, culture because there's a lot of diaspora in Greece, and these images were read in a very particular way in Athens. And
Yes.
you know,
In which way?
in the sense that I think it was the first time that you really saw in the National Museum of Contemporary Art, which is the EMST, which has had a problem opening because of the economic crisis. You saw images of Albanian culture. These were, you know, shown very large in the kind of prominent area in the museum. And there is, even though there's 1 million Albanians living in Greece, there isn't this kind of cultural representation, you know, it's not a cultural presence. And I think it really made a mark. And it was Lala's work in the context also of international artists, but also a very, very astute kind of selection of, you know, historical works from the National Gallery in Tirana that Erzen made, and contemporary artists like Edi Hila, like, Bekiri, Sokol Bekiri. So all of a sudden it became... Exactly. So it was Albanian culture brought in from the side of international culture, which was a very different approach than, you know, you might get documentary photos of migrants or something like that, and that's how you get to encounter Albanian culture, but it's not really seen in the National Museum of Contemporary Art. I think the kind of after effects of that presence are still being discussed in Athens. I was just having a discussion about it. So I think it was just the beginning of a kind of realignment of perceptions, because, you know, we have to, I think when people gather and when artworks gather, it's an opportunity to see people differently, you know. It's also when photographs, when they freeze people, you get to look at someone again and again and again and see them differently in different contexts. I'm really curious how differently you see this here in Albania versus how you see it in Kosovo, for instance, how it resonates, you know. And how similarly, because it's the same and it's the same language, but it's, you know, not the same exactly place. So how the change of context works somehow. So yeah, I think it's just the beginning of something very interesting happening, because of course we all know that the Greek-Albanian relationship is not like perfect. But it's also not finished, it's not dead, you know, it's still moving. And I think that's really important.
But I think also to go to the point why blood-free, from my opinion, is very important to be shown in Marubi. Also because of the phenomena of blood feud in the suburb of Shkodra,
Yes.
in the rural part of Shkodra. And I hope very much that this can be seen as a positive sign of how it was perceived in other side or a neighboring country,
Yes.
and how it was done in the 90s, and how can this overcome.
Well,
And I think very important, and I'm very sure that Marubi will do that, that it's very important that the schools get to see this.
Yeah.
I think it's very important that the young people, because this is where we tend to direct our hope, that the young people will take this initiative, as these young people in Kosovo, as a student of that time, took the initiative to make things better, because there is always a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
As you said, you know, they have a relation which is not good, but it's not bad, there is movement.
Yeah.
So this is the same relation that people are really tired of being close about this, something which happened many years ago, and with some, many times with very banal reasons, and so it can always find a way to forgive.
Well, Anton Cheta came to Shkodra. He reconciled some
Really?
conflicts in
When?
Shkodra, yes.
When?
In 1992, 1993. He also went to Germany, Anton Cheta, did you know that? And he reconciled people that couldn't come to Kosovo, did some diaspora reconciliation, yes. But I stayed with the family in 1995 in Shkodra. That was the last time I was in Shkodra, who who took Anton Chetter as a guest, and they worked in the peace studies. I tried to contact them. I think they'd moved on from Shkodra since 1995, and who'd got prepared the blood feuds for him to reconcile. So it happened in, you know, Albania as well. And it's from the Lector Gojun, maybe the code.
So we need Anton Chetter today.
Yes,
The new
yes.
Anton Chetter.
Well, we used to joke when we used to fall out and argue, so let's call it, do we need to call Anton Chetter to, you know.
Yeah.
So it was in our language at
Yeah.
that time.
So, excuse me.
Yes.
So, just so that I understand, I'm trying to make a parallel with times. So, before the reconciliation, how big was the phenomenon? And was it allowed throughout Tito's time and onwards? Because comparing to Albania, blood feud was as big, but was forbidden. Obviously, when we lived during...
No, it was not forbidden.
No, but I mean, it was not something that it was familiar to our eyes. I mean, we never heard. Of course, it was hidden, obviously. But how big it was, I don't know. Do we know how big it was in the times of communist times? Yes. So there wasn't something, so suddenly for us it exploded as an existing phenomenon only after the 90s. Because it was really repressed, suppressed. So I'm just going back to Kosovo.
No, I think it was.
How big and how
big.
frequent was
I
it?
don't think we knew a lot about it, especially not cities so much. But it was big, but it was not forbidden. No, because it was no interest to be forbidden. It was the opposite. As much as they would kill, it would be much better.
Yes, I
There
mean...
was no interest, either to reconcile, either to forbid.
That's why it was such a threat when it started to be
Yeah, but I
reconciled.
think now when I think back, at that time we didn't talk how strategic this was. But now when I think back, that this was the only way that to be able to do a war and to be able to become a state. This was the only way, first to reconcile between each other, and then to be able to do this. Otherwise,
But behind it, it's only not the politics. I'm interested in the phenomenon. In the city where you live, Lipeia, I think we are the same generation. Did you ever hear the people killed each other? Like in the 90s?
in the city now.
No, that's what I'm saying. There
In
is
the
a
city
reason
now.
behind it.
In the
Because
villages,
people
yes.
all come from villages in the cities.
No,
The
but-
same as
no.
here. No,
Well,
no, okay, but I want to understand.
Well,
how-
I have a tragic story in my own family. My first cousin's son was accidentally killed
Yes.
by a car. And it was just, you know, we just knew that if he wanted to, and he didn't, could take revenge from that driver who killed his son. And that was in the 90s, was the late 80s. So it didn't mean you were going to do it, it just meant you had a right. It was sort of I went with a High Court judge to Kosovo about that time, who was interested in judicial systems. And he said this system, it exists when there isn't another system, because you need to stop someone from just killing. And it was like a sort of, you wouldn't kill anybody because you would afraid that you'd get killed. So it was a sort of law that was the people's law that just came about. And the Serbs, I know a case Anton Chetter told me, where they called the victim's family, the Serb authorities, and gave them a gun and said, go and shoot, you're in a blood feud now, go and shoot, the person, to encourage it.
Again, my question is, did you hear, did you experience, did you have cousins, family?
That actually took revenge.
Before the 90s, before the reconciliation
Yes.
I'm talking about. For example, here, like I said, I never heard that phenomenon. I don't know, a generation that we have a certain experience of the time, and we had families all over, from north to south.
Yes,
Obviously,
and we never
it
heard
was
it,
never something. Later on,
Yes.
I even worked with Shkodra for a film called Forgiveness of Blood. I
Yes.
don't know if you've seen it, but it was it's a big
Forgiving
film.
the blood?
Forgiveness of Blood.
Ah.
So it's shot in Shkodra, and I worked with the crew and with the casting. And I was ignorant. I still think
Yes, I've seen that film.
how
It's good.
big the phenomenon was. I didn't realize, even after the 90s, I didn't realize how big. And I went in the streets all over, in factories, in Shkodra, every village, while we're doing the casting. And because most of the people in there are extras, not actors. And my duty was really to interview, to select 1 in 3 people had someone in blood feud. I couldn't believe it. In the town children in the villages around, go to the women in the factory, her husband was somewhere in hidden. So even us after the night, we didn't realize how big the phenomena was in a time that easily you heard every day in the media how from an accident people got killed on the name of blood feud, you know. So, but I'm just cruising Kosovo.
No, in the city, no. I don't remember
For
that
all
me
this
as a
political
child.
interest,
No.
I would imagine Kosovo would be every day in the streets, people being killed.
No. In city at that time, we didn't know about this phenomenon. I mean, I didn't hear
No, I
much. I
didn't.
don't have relatives who were ever.
And I didn't have relatives.
So I'm impressed to see that
But
mass
the
of people.
villages, I mean, since the whole country is so small, you know, villages, for example, 7 kilometers from Peja, they were in the blood feud. For example, if you would have a person or the lady who would bring you a milk every day, you could hear their word of blood feud because the ladies and the children were allowed to go out and not the man. So you would hear these stories coming from the village, 7 kilometers, but not really in the city. Not really in the city.
Yes.
It doesn't.
It is a
It's not a
village.
phenomenon who belongs to the
Yes,
city.
yes.
Not at all.
Well,
And we saw it also how much it was only when it became
Yeah.
public, when we saw the crowds. And even that, we couldn't see it. We see it much more from our photo.
Yes.
Because in television, that television was restricted. We couldn't follow, nothing like that. Or you should have been participant of the event, or you should see it from the photo. And to be participant of the event, to go from the city, it was not such a smart idea. It was risky.
Lala, both these series, the Blood Feud series and the Haystack series, are very important pieces of work for you as an artist, as a career. I mean, you are very well known also part, I mean, you got to Documenta because of the series. But these are series that you've, developed early on in your career. Have they in any way affected what you did later, or were they just part of your artistic career at that particular time, at that also, in a way, historical time, and that personal time for you, because this was also the time when you were reconnecting with Kosovo. So were they just a part of your life, artistic and private life there, or have they had some influence, some continuation in your other work?
Well, the Haystacks is ongoing. There's some that are from last year that I did recently. So, but Haystacks I was just very obsessed in the 80s and early 90s. But then since then, if I see a haystack, I'll just, on my route for somewhere else, I'll photograph it and add it to the collection. So it's not like a major project, it's just ongoing if I see one. Like there's a Drisht one in Albania, and I wasn't even doing in 1996, I wasn't really interested in haystacks anymore, but they were so amazing, the one upstairs in the cabbage field, that I photographed it when I lived in Albania in 1995. So I kind of have been adding to that collection. And it's just ongoing, you know, when I see one. But the notion in the blood feuds of wearing the costume and some of these things that I saw and witnessed has carried on in my work, in that when I came to do a project in 2004, I find the dream I was looking for, so I got the costume myself and put people in costumes as a kind of dream world of the nostalgia I was seeking, this nostalgia that I couldn't find anymore. And then I juxtaposition it between modern things around Albania and Kosovo, and then Africa, because I wanted to see what would the Albanian costume look like in Africa. What would it look like with somebody black, because you don't really see black people. But then I left that because I'm not, it's not really me. So it just is themes that run on continually, and that I'm interested in. So but now having rediscovered it, it's very interesting to me to see what I captured and to return to those thoughts, and it'll be interesting to see what I do next.
Okay, that's a good place, I think, to conclude. We can, of course, talk informally.
Yes.
But thank you so much. This was really wonderful. Also, so great to have some of it on record, and I'll probably be contacting you to get permission to quote you when we publish this interview in Moose magazine.
Yes.
Yeah.
And thanks again to the Marubi Museum for...
Yes, absolutely. Bravo. Thank you so much.